What happens when three arrogant executives think they can humiliate a quiet janitor working the night shift? They had no idea they were about to face someone whose past would shatter their world completely. Sometimes the most powerful people choose the most humble paths. And sometimes the eighth story reveals truths that change everything. The gleaming towers of Morrison and Associates rose 43 stories into the Seattle skyline, its glass facade, reflecting the city lights like a beacon of corporate power. Inside the building's marble lobby, expensive suits hurried past without a second glance at the maintenance staff, who kept their pristine world spotless. These were men and women who measured their worth in quarterly bonuses and stock options, completely oblivious to the struggles of those who cleaned their offices and maintained their lifestyles. It was nearly midnight when Marcus Thompson pushed his cleaning cart through the executive floors, the soft squeak of its wheels echoing through the empty corridors. The executive floors were a study in opulence, with Persian rugs that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Spread across polished marble floors, Marcus was a man in his early 60s, with graying temples and weathered hands that spoke of decades of honest work. His navy blue janitor's uniform was always immaculately pressed, his movements deliberate and dignified, despite the dismissive glances he often received. Few people bothered to learn his name, preferring to see him as simply part of the building's operational machinery rather than as a human being with a rich history. Even fewer imagined that this quiet man mopping their floors had once commanded the respect of presidents and world leaders, had briefed senators on matters of national security, and had made decisions that affected the safety and freedom of millions of Americans. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that he now worked in a building where people measured their importance by bank account balances. While he had spent 4 decades protecting the very freedoms that allowed them to accumulate such wealth, the executive suite on the 42nd floor was Marcus's final stop each night. This floor housed the offices of the company's 3 most powerful vice presidents, each commanding budgets that exceeded the GDP of small nations. The suite was designed to impress and intimidate, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Seattle's skyline. Richard Blackstone occupied the largest office, a corner suite that proclaimed his status as heir apparent to the company's throne. Blackstone was a man whose family connections had paved his path to power through generations of old money and political influence. His grandfather had been a senator, his father a federal judge, and Richard himself had never known genuine struggle. His Harvard MBA hung prominently on the wall, though everyone knew it had been purchased rather than earned. At 52, he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had never been told no, never faced real consequences. Jennifer Walsh commanded the second largest office, her space decorated with awards telling the story of a woman who had clawed her way to the top through sharp intelligence and ruthless ambition. At 43, she had earned her position through calculated moves that left a trail of destroyed careers. Her sharp tongue was matched by her ability to identify weakness in others and exploit it without mercy. She had come from humble beginnings herself, which made her treatment of working-class employees all the more cruel. David Chen, the youngest at 35, occupied an office reflecting his status as the rising star. His Yale MBA was displayed with religious reverence. His walls were covered with photographs showing him with politicians and celebrities. Chen's arrogance had grown with each promotion, each bonus feeding his insatiable ego. He had convinced himself that his rapid rise was due purely to superior intellect, rather than his willingness to take credit for others' work. Tonight, unusually, all 3 were still in the building, locked in what appeared to be a heated emergency meeting. The building's after-hours lighting cast long shadows through the executive suite, creating an atmosphere of conspiracy and desperation. The company was facing a federal investigation into securities fraud, insider trading, and tax evasion, charges that threatened not only their fortunes but their freedom. As Marcus approached the conference room with his supplies, he could hear raised voices through the heavy oak doors, voices filled with panic, anger, and the kind of desperation that comes when people who have never faced consequences suddenly find themselves staring into the abyss. The company was hemorrhaging money as investors fled and regulators circled like sharks. What Marcus didn't initially know was that these three executives were discussing how to shift blame onto lower-level employees to save their own careers. They were so absorbed in their scheming, so focused on their plans to destroy innocent lives to preserve their comfort, that they didn't notice when Marcus quietly entered to empty the trash bins. To them, he was furniture, a piece of operational equipment that could be ignored while they plotted their escape from justice. They had no idea that the man cleaning their conference table had spent decades hunting down criminals who employed exactly the same tactics they were now discussing. Richard Blackstone, heavy-set man with thinning hair and an expensive Rolex that cost more than most people's cars, was the first to spot Marcus. Blackstone's face, already red from stress and whiskey, darkened further with indignation at this interruption. His expensive suit, custom-tailored on Savile Row, couldn't disguise the soft body of a man who had never done physical work. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he barked, his voice carrying the entitled rage of someone accustomed to having every whim immediately satisfied. The question wasn't really about Marcus's presence. It was about the audacity of a lower-class person daring to exist in the same space as his betters. Marcus looked up calmly from the trash bin he was emptying, his hands steady despite the hostile atmosphere. His movements remained deliberate and professional, showing none of the deference these executives expected from people they considered inferior. "Just doing my job, sir. Cleaning the conference room as scheduled in the building's maintenance protocol." Jennifer Walsh, a sharp-faced woman whose designer suits and perfectly styled hair couldn't mask the coldness in her eyes, laughed derisively at Marcus's response. Her laughter was harsh and cutting, designed to humiliate and establish dominance. She had perfected this laugh over years of corporate warfare, using it as a weapon to destroy confidence. "Scheduled," she repeated mockingly, glancing at her platinum Cartier watch with theatrical annoyance. "This is a private meeting, not some routine cleaning time for the help." She emphasized the last word with particular venom, her voice dripping with class-based hatred. "Can't you people follow simple instructions? Or is basic comprehension beyond your capabilities?" Marcus absorbed the insult without flinching, drawing on decades of experience dealing with hostile subjects who mistook his calm demeanor for weakness. "I apologize for the interruption," he replied with quiet dignity that stood in stark contrast to their crude behavior. "I'll return later when you're finished with your meeting." He began to gather his supplies with the same methodical precision. He brought to everything, but David Chen stepped forward to block his path. Chen was a lean man whose expensive clothes couldn't disguise his desperate need for validation. His Yale MBA hung behind his desk like a religious icon, a constant reminder of his supposed intellectual superiority. Tonight, faced with the possibility that his carefully constructed image might crumble under federal scrutiny, he was looking for someone weaker to abuse, someone he could dominate to restore his shattered sense of power. "Hold on just a minute," Chen said, his voice dripping with condescension and barely controlled panic. "Since you're here, maybe you can settle something for us. We were just discussing how some people in this company don't understand their place, don't comprehend the natural hierarchy that exists in any successful organization." He looked Marcus up and down dismissively, his eyes taking in the janitor's uniform with obvious disdain. "What do you think happens to employees who overstep their boundaries, who forget that there are consequences for not knowing your place in the world?" The question was loaded with threat and menace, designed to intimidate and establish dominance. Chen had used similar tactics countless times to cow subordinates, to make them understand that challenging his authority would result in swift retaliation. He expected Marcus to stammer, to apologize, to show the fear that would restore his sense of superiority. Marcus met Chen's gaze steadily, his expression calm and untroubled by the implied threat. His voice when he spoke was level and measured, carrying a quiet authority that none of the executives recognized. "I believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their position. Dignity isn't determined by job title or salary. It comes from how you treat others, especially those who can't fight back." The response clearly wasn't what any of the three executives had expected. They were accustomed to immediate submission from people they considered social and economic inferiors. Marcus's calm dignity in the face of their hostility seemed to infuriate them further, as if his refusal to be intimidated was itself an act of rebellion. Blackstone burst into harsh laughter, the sound echoing off the conference room's polished walls like the bark of a rabid dog. Respect? Dignity? He repeated mockingly, his face growing redder with each word. Listen here, old man. Respect is earned, not given away like some participation trophy. You push a mop around our building, we make decisions that affect thousands of jobs, millions of dollars, entire market sectors. He pointed a thick finger at Marcus with casual arrogance. There's a hierarchy here, a natural order, and you're at the bottom of it. It's not cruelty. That's just reality. His words revealed the depth of his delusion, the genuine belief that his inherited wealth and purchased education made him inherently superior to people who worked with their hands. To Blackstone, the universe was naturally ordered with people like him at the top and people like Marcus at the bottom. Walsh nodded enthusiastically, her smile cruel and predatory as she sensed an opportunity to vent her frustrations on someone she saw as powerless. Exactly right, Richard. Some people are born to lead, others to serve. It's just the natural order of things, the way society has always been structured. She gestured dismissively at Marcus's uniform with a perfectly manicured hand that had never known calluses. This is where you belong. Don't get any ideas above your station. Don't imagine that your opinion matters in discussions between your betters. The three executives exchanged amused glances, clearly enjoying what they saw as easy entertainment in the midst of their legal troubles. They had no idea they were about to learn a lesson in humility that would haunt them for the rest of their careers. Chen leaned against the conference table with practiced casualness, crossing his arms with smug satisfaction as he prepared to deliver what he thought would be the killing blow to Marcus's dignity. His body language screamed dominance and control, though anyone with real experience would have recognized it as the posturing of someone deeply insecure. Tell me, Marcus. It is Marcus, isn't it? Chen said, savoring the opportunity to use the janitor's first name while denying him the courtesy of using titles. How long have you been cleaning floors? How many years have you spent in this ... humble profession? The question was designed to humiliate, to reduce Marcus's entire existence to a series of menial tasks that Chen obviously considered beneath human dignity. It was the kind of cruelty that people inflict when they need to feel superior. About 2 years here at Morrison & Associates, Marcus replied calmly, continuing to organize his cleaning supplies with methodical precision. His answer revealed nothing of the storm building behind his calm exterior, nothing of the decades of experience that informed his every decision. 2 years, Chen repeated mockingly, his voice filled with theatrical amazement. And before that? More janitorial work, I assume? Maybe a security guard position? Parking lot attendant? Night watchman at some warehouse? His tone grew more contemptuous with each suggestion, each word designed to strip away another layer of Marcus's presumed dignity. The other executives chuckled at Chen's performance, clearly enjoying the verbal assault on someone they saw as defenseless. Marcus paused in his work, considering his response carefully while these three powerful people waited for him to reveal some embarrassing detail they could use to further humiliate him. I had a different career before this one, he said finally, his voice giving away nothing of what that career might have been. Blackstone snorted with derision, his imagination already filling in what he assumed were pathetic details. Let me guess, factory worker? Construction laborer? Oh wait, I know you were probably in the military. That's where they teach people like you to follow orders without thinking, to accept your place in the hierarchy without question. The comment revealed everything about Blackstone's worldview. His assumption that military service was somehow beneath him, that the men and women who put their lives on the line were inherently inferior to people who inherited wealth. The mindset of someone who had never served anything larger than his own appetite for power. Actually, Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a new undertone that the executives were too wrapped up in their cruelty to notice, I was in law enforcement. The admission should have given them pause, should have prompted questions about what kind of law enforcement, what level of responsibility. Instead, it only fueled their mockery, their need to reduce every aspect of his life to something they could dismiss. Walsh's eyebrows rose in exaggerated surprise, her voice filled with theatrical amazement that barely concealed her contempt. Law enforcement. What? A mall cop? Campus security at some community college. She turned to her colleagues with cruel delight. Our janitor used to be a rent-a-cop. How absolutely precious. I bet he had a little badge and everything. The three executives burst into renewed laughter, their voices echoing off the expensive furnishings like the howling of jackals. They were so consumed with their amusement, so intoxicated by their sense of superiority, that they failed to notice the subtle change in Marcus's posture, the way his eyes hardened almost imperceptibly. Chen wiped tears of laughter from his eyes, clearly delighted with the entertainment value of humiliating someone he saw as completely powerless. This is absolutely rich. So you went from pretending to be a real police officer to pushing a mop around corporate offices? That's quite a career trajectory, quite a fall from grace. He gestured grandly at the luxurious conference room with its imported marble table and priceless artwork. Meanwhile, we're up here making real decisions, wielding real power, controlling real wealth. The difference between us and you couldn't be more obvious if we tried to explain it. Marcus set down his cleaning supplies carefully and turned to face the three executives fully, his movement deliberate and controlled in a way that should have warned them they were dealing with someone far more dangerous than they imagined. When he spoke, his voice was still calm, but it now carried an undertone of authority that made the air in the room seem to vibrate. You mentioned power, he said, his words measured and precise. What exactly do you consider real power to be? Is it the ability to destroy others for your own benefit? Is it the capacity to escape consequences through wealth and connections? Or is it something else entirely? The question hung in the air like a challenge, though the three executives were too intoxicated by their own superiority to recognize the danger they were walking into. They had mistaken Marcus's quiet dignity for submission, his calm demeanor for weakness. Blackstone straightened his expensive silk tie with a smug grin that revealed his complete confidence in his own invincibility. Real power, my dear janitor, is controlling billion-dollar budgets that can make or break entire industries with a single decision. It's having senators and governors return your phone calls within minutes because they need your support for their campaigns. He pointed his thick finger at Marcus with casual arrogance. It's making decisions that shape markets, economies, and the lives of millions of people around the world. Real power is what separates us from people like you, the ability to control your own destiny and the destinies of others. His words revealed the depth of his delusion, the genuine belief that his inherited wealth made him inherently superior to people who had earned their positions through merit and service. To Blackstone, power was simply the ability to impose his will without consequence. Walsh nodded enthusiastically, her voice filled with condescending smugness. Real power, she added with a smile that revealed perfect white teeth that had cost more than most people earned in a year. It's earned through education from the finest institutions, connections with the right people, and the intelligence, too. Navigate complex systems that lesser minds simply cannot comprehend. She gestured with obvious pride at her Harvard MBA diploma hanging on the wall like a religious icon. That's Harvard Business School, by the way. I doubt you'd even know what the inside of a real university looks like, much less understand the level of intellectual rigor required to succeed there. Her comment revealed everything about her worldview, the assumption that education was about prestige rather than knowledge, that intelligence was measured by institutional affiliation rather than actual accomplishment. Chen nodded enthusiastically, his young face flushed with arrogance. It's exactly right, Jennifer. We didn't get here by accident or luck. We worked incredibly hard, made smart, strategic choices, connected with the right people, and demonstrated the kind of vision and leadership that separates true achievers from the masses. He looked Marcus up and down again with obvious disdain. Some people just aren't cut out for anything more than manual labor. It's not their fault, really. Not everyone can handle the pressure and complexity of real responsibility. The three executives basked in their own perceived brilliance, completely unaware that they were revealing themselves to be exactly the kind of corrupt, entitled criminals that Marcus had spent decades hunting down. Their casual cruelty, their complete lack of empathy, and their absolute certainty in their own superiority were traits he had seen countless times in terrorists. organized crime bosses, and corrupt politicians. Marcus listened to their speeches with the patience of a man who had interrogated some of the most dangerous criminals in the world, who had sat across from terrorists and foreign agents without flinching. "And what happens?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying a new edge that should have warned them to tread carefully when that power is built on corruption. When those smart choices involve breaking the law and destroying innocent lives, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as the implications of Marcus's question began to sink in. The three executives suddenly realized that their conversation about framing innocent employees had been overheard. Blackstone's face darkened dangerously, his usual jovial arrogance replaced by something much more threatening. "What the hell? Is that supposed to mean, old man? Are you suggesting that we've done something wrong? You actually accusing us of criminal behavior?" The transformation was remarkable. The mask of civilized behavior had slipped, revealing the true nature of a man who had never been seriously challenged, never been held accountable for his actions. "I mean," Marcus said, his voice still level despite the rising tension, "that I've been listening to your conversation for the past 15 minutes. I've heard you discussing how to falsify documents, how to frame innocent employees for crimes they didn't commit, how to obstruct a federal investigation. It doesn't sound like leadership to me. It sounds like criminal conspiracy." The words hit the three executives like physical blows, each accusation more damaging than the last. They had been so focused on their own problems, so confident in their own security, that they had forgotten the most basic rule of criminal behavior: never discuss your crimes where others might overhear. Walsh's face went pale, then flushed, red with a mixture of anger and panic as she realized the magnitude of their mistake. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "What? You're nothing but a janitor eavesdropping on private conversations between your betters. If you repeat one word of what you think you heard here tonight, I'll make sure you're not only fired but blacklisted from every cleaning service, every security company, every minimum wage job in this entire city." Her threat revealed everything about her character when faced with the possibility of accountability. Her first instinct was to destroy the messenger rather than confront her own criminal behavior. Chen stepped forward aggressively, his young face twisted with rage that comes from having one's carefully constructed image threatened. "Better yet, we'll have you arrested for industrial espionage, for corporate spying, for invasion of privacy. Who's going to believe the word of a washed-up, broken-down security guard against three successful executives with impeccable reputations?" The irony of Chen's threat was lost on him. He was discussing additional crimes even as he denied the original ones, proving Marcus's point about their criminal mindset more effectively than any evidence could have. Blackstone cracked his knuckles menacingly, the sound echoing through the conference room like gunshots. "Maybe it's time someone taught you about consequences, old man. It's about what happens when people forget their place, when they think they can challenge their betters without facing the price." The threat was unmistakable, the implication clear. These three powerful executives were prepared to use violence to protect their secrets. They had revealed themselves to be exactly what Marcus had suspected: criminals who believed their wealth placed them above the law. Marcus remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged despite the escalating threats. He'd faced down. Terrorists with bombs strapped to their chests had stared into the eyes of serial killers and foreign assassins. The corporate bluster of three corrupt executives was nothing compared to what he had faced in his previous life. Consequences. He repeated thoughtfully, as if the word held special meaning for him. "Yes, I think it's time we talked about consequences, about accountability, about what happens when people believe they're above the law." The three executives exchanged confident glances, clearly believing they had intimidated Marcus into submission with their threats. They had no idea that the quiet man standing before them had spent decades dealing with threats from people far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. Walsh pulled out her phone with theatrical smugness, her movements sharp and aggressive. As she prepared to make good on her threats, "I'm calling security to have you removed from this building immediately. And then I'm calling our legal department to discuss what criminal charges we can file against you for espionage and harassment." Her confidence was absolute, her certainty complete. In her world, problems like Marcus Thompson were solved with phone calls to lawyers and security guards, with applications of money and influence that made inconvenient people disappear. "Before you make that call," Marcus said calmly, his voice carrying a new authority that made the air in the room seem to vibrate with tension. "Perhaps I should properly introduce myself.
Ow.
It seems there's been some confusion about who I am and what I'm capable of." Chen laughed harshly, his voice cracking slightly with the strain of maintaining his aggressive facade. "We already know exactly who you are. You're Marcus Thompson, janitor, employee number 7749. A nobody who's about to become an unemployed nobody with a criminal record and a reputation that will ensure you never work in this city again." The arrogance in Chun's voice was absolute, his certainty complete. In his mind, he had already won this confrontation, had already reduced Marcus to a broken, defeated man who would slink away into obscurity. Marcus reached into his uniform pocket, with deliberate, careful movements, and pulled out a small leather wallet that looked ordinary enough, but carried the weight of decades of service and sacrifice. He opened it carefully, as if handling something precious, and held it up so all three executives could see the identification inside. "Actually," he said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded the respect of presidents and world leaders, "I'm Marcus Thompson, former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The silence that followed was absolute, profound, and terrifying. It was the silence of a world crashing down, of carefully constructed lies being exposed to the harsh light of truth, of three corrupt executives realizing that they had just threatened one of the most powerful law enforcement officials in American history. Walsh's phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers and clattered onto the polished conference table, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. Her face cycled through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, denial, and finally dawning horror as the full implications of what she had just learned began to sink in. Chen's mouth fell open, his arrogant sneer melting away like ice in the dessert as he stared at the identification in Marcus's hand. His young face, so confident moments before, now looked pale and terrified as he realized the magnitude of their mistake. Blackstone staggered backward, as if he'd been physically struck, his bulky frame hitting the conference room wall with a solid thud. His face cycled through shock, disbelief, and dawning horror as the reality of their situation became clear. This wasn't just any janitor they had threatened. This was a man who had commanded the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world. Marcus closed the wallet and returned it to his pocket, his movements deliberate and calm, despite the chaos he had just unleashed. "I served as FBI director for 8 years, he continued, his voice measured and authoritative. "During that time, I oversaw investigations into terrorism, organized crime, political corruption, and yes, securities fraud and corporate crime." His words hit the three executives like physical blows, each revelation more devastating than the last. They were learning that the man they had dismissed as beneath their notice was actually someone who had operated at the highest levels of government. "I retired 2 years ago with full honors and took this position because I wanted to live quietly, to serve in a different way, to find peace after decades of confronting the worst elements of human nature." His eyes hardened as he looked at each of them in turn. "But I never stopped being an observer of human nature, and I never stopped recognizing criminal behavior when I saw it." Walsh's voice came out as barely a whisper, her usual commanding tone replaced by something that sounded almost like begging. That's not possible. You're just a janitor. You clean our offices. You empty our trash. You can't be." Can't really be. She couldn't even finish the sentence. Couldn't bring herself to say the words that would acknowledge the reality of their situation. In her mind, the universe had natural laws. Important people looked important, powerful. People displayed their power. "I am a janitor," Marcus agreed, his voice patient and calm. "But I'm also a man who has briefed 4 different presidents on matters of national security, who's overseen operations that saved thousands of lives, who has dedicated his entire adult life to pursuing justice and protecting the innocent. From people exactly like you." His eyes hardened as he looked at each of them in turn. "And I'm also someone who recognizes criminal conspiracy when I hear it, who understands exactly what you were discussing, and who has both the authority and the obligation to ensure that justice is served Chen tried desperately to recover his composure, but his voice shook as he spoke, revealing the terror building inside him. Even if that's true, even if you really are who you claim to be, you can't prove anything. It's your word against ours. No one will believe that 3 respected executives were stupid enough to discuss criminal activity in front of a witness. The desperation in Chen's voice was palpable, his need to find some escape overwhelming his ability to think clearly. He was grasping at straws, hoping against hope that there might be some way out of the trap they had walked into. Marcus smiled for the first time that evening, but there was no warmth in it, no humor or kindness. It was the smile of a predator, who had finally cornered his prey, of a hunter who had spent decades tracking criminals. "Mr. Chen," he said, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining something to a child. "Did you happen to notice that I was cleaning near the air vent when you were discussing your plans to falsify documents and frame innocent employees? The same air vent that houses one of this building's sophisticated security microphones." He gestured toward a small, nearly invisible device mounted near the ceiling, a piece of technology so subtle that the executives had never noticed it despite working in this room for years. "This building records everything for insurance and liability purposes. Every word you spoke tonight, every threat you made, every crime you planned, it's all documented in digital format with timestamps and voice identification." The color drained from Blackstone's face as the full implications of Marcus's revelation hit him. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction, the desperate hope of a man who knows he's already lost. "You're just a janitor. You don't have access to security systems." "You're absolutely right," Marcus said mildly, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone who has dealt with desperate criminals countless times before. "I don't have access to them as a janitor. But as a former FBI director with ongoing security clearance and federal law enforcement authority, I do have the power to request surveillance footage as part of a federal investigation." He paused, letting the implications of his words sink, and before delivering the final blow, "which, coincidentally, is exactly what I'm going to do first thing tomorrow morning. The federal task force investigating your company will be very interested in tonight's recorded conversation about document falsification, witness tampering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." Walsh sank into a nearby chair, her designer composure crumbling like a house of cards. "This isn't happening," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This can't be happening. We're too important, too connected, too powerful for this to be real." Her words revealed the depth of her delusion, the genuine belief that her wealth and position made her immune to consequences. She was learning, far too late, that justice could reach even the highest levels of corporate power. Marcus began gathering, his cleaning supplies again, his movements unhurried and methodical, despite the chaos he had unleashed. "For 2 years," he said quietly, "I've watched this company from the ground floor up. I've seen how you treat people you consider beneath you. I've listened to your casual discussions of illegal activities. I've observed your complete lack of regard for the employees whose livelihoods depend on your decisions." He paused in his work, looking directly at each executive with eyes that seemed to see straight through their expensive facades. "Did you know that Maria Gonzalez, the cleaning lady on the 35th floor, supporting 3 children on her salary while putting herself through nursing school? Or that James Parker, the security guard you barely acknowledge, is a decorated veteran who's putting himself through law school at night while working 2 jobs to support his disabled wife?" The executives stared at him in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how this man they had dismissed as invisible had such detailed knowledge of the building's other employees. They were learning that Marcus Thompson saw everything, knew everything, and cared about people they had never bothered to notice. Chen's voice cracked as he tried to speak, the last vestiges of his arrogance crumbling. We didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to. You meant every word," Marcus interrupted firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had interrogated countless criminals. "You meant it when you called me names behind my back? You meant it when you discussed framing innocent employees for your crimes. You meant it when you decided that your wealth and education made you inherently superior to people who work with their hands." His voice remained calm, but the authority in it was unmistakable. "No. The only thing you didn't mean to do was get caught. But that's what always happens to people like you. You become so convinced of your own invincibility that you forget the basic rules of criminal behavior. Blackstone made one last desperate attempt to regain control, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. "Look, we can work this out. Maybe we were a little harsh tonight, maybe we said some things we shouldn't have, but it's been an incredibly stressful time. Surely we can reach some kind of understanding, some kind of arrangement that benefits everyone involved." The offer was unmistakable: money, favors, whatever it took to make this problem disappear. Blackstone was falling back on the only solution. He had ever known the belief that every person had a price and every problem could be solved with the right application of wealth and influence. Marcus shook his head slowly, his expression showing a mixture of disappointment and pity. For these men who had never learned the difference between power and authority, between influence and integrity. "Mr. Blackstone, in my 37 years with the Bureau, I've heard that same plea from drug dealers, arms traffickers, organized crime bosses, and corrupt politicians. The words never change, and neither do the people who speak them." He picked up his cleaning cart and began pushing it toward the door, his movements calm and deliberate. "You had your chance to show character tonight. Instead, you chose to reveal exactly who you really are: corrupt, entitled criminals who believe your wealth places you above the law." As Marcus reached the doorway, he turned back one final time, his eyes taking in the three executives who sat in stunned, terrified silence. "Oh, and gentlemen, lady, you might want to call your lawyers. The federal task force investigating your company will want to speak with you very soon. I suspect they'll be particularly interested in tonight's recorded conversation about document falsification, witness tampering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." He paused, his expression showing neither anger nor satisfaction, only the calm determination of someone who had spent a lifetime ensuring that justice was served. "You see, this is what real power looks like, not the ability to abuse others or escape consequences, but the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it means humbling yourself to serve others." With that, Marcus Thompson, former director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and current janitor of Morrison & Associates, pushed his cart through the doorway and disappeared down the corridor, leaving three of Seattle's most powerful executives sitting in stunned, terrified silence as they contemplated the ruins of their carefully constructed lives. The transformation was swift and merciless. Within hours of Marcus's revelation, the carefully constructed empire of corruption that Blackstone, Walsh, and Chen had built came crashing down around them. The federal investigation that had been circling the company like a patient predator suddenly had everything it needed to strike with devastating force. The building's security recordings were seized by federal agents who arrived with search warrants before dawn. Every word of the executive's conspiracy was captured in crystal-clear digital audio, time-stamped and authenticated beyond any possibility of denial. Their plans to frame innocent employees, casual discussions of document destruction, their threats against Marcus, it was all there, preserved forever in the kind of evidence that prosecutors dream about and defense attorneys have nightmares. Richard Blackstone was arrested at his Bellevue mansion at 6 in the morning, pulled from his breakfast table in front of his wife and children as federal agents read him his rights. The charges were extensive and devastating: conspiracy to commit securities fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and racketeering. His family's political connections, which had protected him for so long, suddenly became liabilities. As senators and governors rushed to distance themselves from the scandal, Janitor Walsh was taken into custody at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, attempting to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands with suitcases full of cash and hard drives containing encrypted financial records. Her arrest was broadcast live on the evening news, the image of the once powerful executive in handcuffs becoming an instant symbol of corporate corruption brought to justice. The sight of her being led away in chains sent shockwaves through the business community. David Chen was found in his office at 3 in the morning, frantically attempting to delete files from his computer when federal agents burst through the door. His youth, which he had always seen as an advantage in the corporate world, now worked against him as prosecutors portrayed him as an eager participant in criminal conspiracy. Someone who had embraced corruption from the very beginning of his career, The shockwaves rippled throughout Seattle's business community and beyond. Morrison & Associates had been considered one of the most prestigious firms in the Pacific Northwest. Its executives regular fixtures at charity galas and political fundraisers. The revelation that 3 of its top officers were common criminals sent tremors through every boardroom in the city, but perhaps most shocking of all was the identity of the man who had brought them down. The story of Marcus Thompson, the FBI director turned janitor, captured the imagination of people around the world. Here was a man who had commanded the most powerful law enforcement agency on Earth, who had briefed presidents and hunted terrorists, choosing to spend his retirement pushing a mop through corporate offices. The media attention was intense and immediate. News outlets competed to tell the story of the humble janitor who had taken down 3 corrupt executives. Marcus found himself besieged by reporters, all wanting to know why a former FBI director had chosen such a humble profession. His answer was always the same, delivered with the quiet dignity that had marked his entire career. Service comes in many forms. I spent my life protecting this country from its enemies. Now I'm helping to keep it clean, one floor at a time. The other employees of Morrison & Associates, the security guards, maintenance staff, and administrative assistants, who had been invisible to the executives, suddenly found themselves treated with new respect. Marcus had shown the world that dignity and worth weren't determined by job titles or paychecks, but by character and integrity. Maria Gonzalez, the cleaning lady Marcus had mentioned, was offered a full scholarship to complete her nursing degree by a grateful client who had read about her story in the newspaper. The scholarship included full tuition, books, and a living stipend that would allow her to focus on her studies while still supporting her children. James Parker, a security guard studying law, was contacted by several prestigious firms offering internships and mentorship opportunities. One senior partner at a major Seattle law firm said, "Anyone Marcus Thompson speaks highly of is someone we want to know." The federal investigation expanded rapidly, uncovering a network of corruption that extended far beyond 3 executives. Dozens of other companies were implicated in the scheme, their own executives facing similar charges as the House of Cards collapsed. The scandal became a turning point in corporate accountability, leading to new regulations and oversight measures designed to prevent such widespread corruption. Marcus continued his work at Morrison & Associates, which was now operating under federal oversight, with new management committed to ethical practices. He refused all offers for book deals, speaking engagements, and lucrative consulting positions. He had found peace in his simple routine, in the satisfaction of honest work well done. The trial of Blackstone, Walsh, and Chen became a media sensation, with Marcus's testimony serving as the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. He testified with the same calm authority he had displayed that night in the conference room, methodically detailing their crimes and the evidence against them. The defense attorneys tried desperately to discredit him, to suggest that his testimony was somehow tainted by his desire for revenge against executives who had humiliated him. But Marcus remained unshakable, his credibility unassailable. Here was a man who had dedicated his life to justice, who had nothing to gain from lying and everything to lose. During cross-examination, Walsh's attorney attempted to portray Marcus as a bitter man seeking revenge. "Isn't it true, Mr. Thompson, that you were humiliated by my client's treatment of you that night?" Marcus considered the question carefully before responding. "I was disappointed by her behavior. Yes, but not humiliated. You see, my sense of self-worth doesn't depend on how others treat me. It comes from knowing I've done my duty." The attorney pressed on. "But surely you felt anger at being called names, at being treated as inferior?" "I felt sadness," Marcus replied quietly. "Sadness that 3 people in positions of great responsibility had so little understanding of what true leadership means. I felt sorry for them, actually." The simplicity and sincerity of his answers devastated the defense's strategy. Here was a man who had faced down international terrorists without losing his composure, wasn't going to be rattled by corporate lawyers. When Blackstone's attorney suggested that Marcus had somehow entrapped his client, Marcus responded with a slight smile. "Sir, I was emptying trash cans. Your client chose to confess his crimes to what he thought was an audience of one janitor. That's not entrapment. That's arrogance. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts. On all counts, Blackstone received 15 years in federal prison, Walsh 12 years, and Chen 10 years. Their appeals were unsuccessful. Their assets frozen and distributed to the employees they had tried to destroy. The sentencing hearing was particularly powerful. Marcus was called to give a victim impact statement, though he had initially declined. At the judge's urging, he finally agreed to speak. "Your Honor," he began, standing before the packed courtroom, "I don't consider myself a victim here. I'm a man who was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time to prevent a greater injustice. The real victims are the employees these defendants plan to frame, the shareholders they defrauded, and the public trust they violated." He turned to look at the 3 defendants who sat with their heads down, unable to meet his gaze. "I hope they use their time in prison to reflect on what true service means, what real leadership looks like. Perhaps they'll emerge as better people. I certainly hope so." The judge, visibly moved by Marcus's words, said before pronouncing sentence, "In my 30 years on the bench, I've rarely seen such a clear example of the difference between power and authority, between privilege and responsibility. Mr. Thompson, you've reminded us all what public service truly means." In the aftermath of the trial, Marcus was approached by documentary filmmakers, investigative journalists, and authors, all wanting to tell his story. He politely declined each request, preferring to let his actions speak for themselves. "Eighth story," he would say to those who persisted, "isn't about the person who tells it. It's about the lesson it teaches." And what was that lesson? That power without principle is merely tyranny waiting to be exposed. That respect must be earned through character, not inherited through privilege. That justice, though sometimes delayed, is never truly denied. There are people willing to stand up for what's right. The story of Marcus Thompson became required reading in business ethics courses across the country. His example inspired a new generation of leaders to consider not just what they could achieve, but how they treated others along the way. Leadership schools began teaching the Thompson principle that true authority comes from service, not from dominance. The Morrison and Associates building was renamed the Marcus Thompson Federal Building in his honor, though he had requested that his name not be used. When asked about the dedication ceremony, Marcus simply said, "Buildings don't need names. They need good people working inside them." Years later, visitors to the building would sometimes see a dignified older man in a janitor's uniform, quietly going about his work with the same careful attention to detail that had once characterized his pursuit of the nation's most dangerous criminals. Some knew who he was. Others saw only a janitor, but for those who looked closely, who took the time to see beyond the uniform to the man beneath, they would recognize something special. They would see integrity made manifest, dignity in action, and the quiet power that comes from a life dedicated to service. The transformation of Morrison and Associates became a model for corporate reform. The new leadership, chosen through a rigorous vetting process overseen by federal monitors, implemented radical changes in company culture. Executive compensation was tied to employee satisfaction scores. A whistleblower protection program was established with real teeth. Most importantly, a dignity charter was adopted that guaranteed respectful treatment for all employees, regardless of position. Marcus played an unofficial role in these changes, though he refused any formal title or additional compensation. New executives would seek him out for advice, and he would offer it quietly, often while continuing his cleaning duties. His office hours, as employees jokingly called them, became legendary, profound conversations about leadership and ethics, conducted while he mopped floors or emptied trash bins. One young executive, brought in to replace Chen, approached Marcus one evening. "Mr. Thompson, I need advice. How do I earn the respect of people who know I'm making 100 times what they are?" Marcus paused in his work, considering the question. Respect isn't about what you make or what title you hold. It's about whether you make the people around you better. Can they count on you to do the right thing when it's hard? Do you see them as human beings or as tools for your success? The young man nodded thoughtfully. But how do I show them that I'm different from the executives who came before? You don't show them, Marcus replied gently. You prove it, one interaction at a time, one decision at a time. Remember, the moment you start thinking about how to appear respectful rather than how to be respectful, you've already lost your way. These conversations, overheard by other employees, became part of the building's folklore. Marcus Thompson wasn't just the janitor who had brought down corrupt executives. He was the conscience of the organization, the living reminder of what true leadership looked like. The ripple effects of the Morrison case extended far beyond one company. Other corporations, seeing the devastating consequences of ignoring corruption, began implementing their own reforms. The Thompson Standard became shorthand for ethical leadership in the business world. Congress held hearings on corporate governance reform, with Marcus called to testify. He appeared in his janitor's uniform, politely declining the suggestion that he'll wear a suit. I'm testifying as the person I am now, he explained, not the person I used to be. His testimony was simple and powerful. Senators, you don't need new laws to prevent what happened at Morrison and Associates. You need people to remember that their job is to serve others, not themselves. You need leaders who understand that their authority comes from the trust placed in them, not from their ability to escape consequences. When one senator asked what he would say to current CEOs, Marcus replied, I'd ask them to spend a day doing the work of their lowest paid employee, not as a publicity stunt, but genuinely trying to understand what their decisions mean to real people. If you can't look your janitor in the eye and explain why you deserve to make 1,000 times their salary, maybe you need to reconsider your priorities. The hearing room fell silent. Here was a man who had voluntarily given up tremendous power and prestige, speaking truth to power with the authority that only comes from absolute integrity. As the years passed, Marcus continued his quiet work. He watched new employees arrive, ambitious young people eager to make their mark. He saw how some learned the lessons of respect and service, while others fell into old patterns of arrogance and entitlement. His presence alone was often enough to keep people honest, the knowledge that someone was watching who had seen it all before. On his 70th birthday, the employees of Morrison and Associates threw him a surprise party. They presented him with a plaque that read, "To Marcus Thompson, he showed us that true power serves others." Below that was a simple inscription, "The eighth story." Sometimes the most important person in the room is the one cleaning its floors. Marcus accepted the honor graciously, though he redirected attention to the other maintenance staff. I'm one of many people who keep this place running, he said. Don't forget that every person here has dignity, regardless of their job description. The party became an annual tradition, a reminder of the values that now defined the organization. Each year, new employees would hear the story of the night. Marcus Thompson revealed his true identity, and each year, the lesson would be passed down. Never underestimate anyone, because you never know who they really are, or what they're capable of. The eighth story had become more than just an incident. It had become a philosophy, a way of treating others with the respect and dignity that every human being deserves. And at the center of it all was a man who had chosen service over status, humility over hierarchy, and justice over personal gain. Marcus Thompson understood that real power wasn't about commanding others, but about serving them, not about accumulating wealth, but about building character. Not about avoiding consequences, but about accepting responsibility. He had spent a lifetime learning these lessons, and in one transformative night, he had taught them to 3 executives who thought they were untouchable. The eighth story was complete, but its message would echo through the halls of power for generations to come. In boardrooms and break rooms, in executive suites and janitors' closets, people would remember the night a humble maintenance worker reminded the world what true leadership really looks like. Thank you for joining us on this remarkable journey of dignity, justice, and the power of quiet integrity. We've witnessed how arrogance and corruption crumbled before the unwavering resolve of one man who chose service over self-interest, humility over pride, and justice over convenience. Marcus Thompson's story reminds us that true authority comes not from position or wealth, but from character and the courage to do what's right. It shows us that the most powerful people are often those we overlook, those who serve others without recognition or reward. If this story moved you, take a moment to appreciate the quiet heroes in your own life, the custodians, security guards, and service workers who make our world function while often remaining invisible to those they serve. They deserve our respect, our gratitude, and our recognition. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire hope, courage, and positive change. Together, we can ensure that every voice is heard and every act of integrity is celebrated, because sometimes the eighth story is the one that changes everything. And sometimes the person who changes everything is the one you least expect.